Hi everyone, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks, and also welcome to the first ever tank review of a tier 9 premium tank in a game that is 10 years old. You are taking a look at the STRV K and you are looking at it with the Spirit of War style, as this is a collaboration between Sabaton and World of Tanks. But I'm not really going to focus on the Sabaton vibe of this vehicle. If you're a fan of Sabaton, then you're the only one who's going to know how much this vehicle is worth to you. What I'm going to focus on today is the economics of the vehicle, what it means to a pure World of Tanks player, and also whether the vehicle is any good. So the first thing to talk about when it comes to the STRV K is that what do tier 9 premium tanks do different to all other vehicles of premium status so far in the game? And that is that, as we can see up here, they are going to earn bonds, which is the most desirable currency inside World of Tanks. Now, how many bonds are you going to make? Well, you make the same amount of bonds as if you were playing a tier 10 tank. So if you finish in the mid-table, as I performed here, you're going to get yourself 5 bonds. If you finish at the top, you're going to get yourself 7, and I don't believe you get any bonds for finishing in the bottom. But apart from that, the tier 9 premium tanks are going to be almost identical to the tier 8 vehicles, including in their economics, as I'll be showing you later on. But before I take the first ever tier 9 premium tank out onto the battlefield, why don't we take a good look at the statistics of the tank so we can see how it stacks up compared to its competition. So when you look at the STRV K, it should be immediately very familiar for you if you are a dedicated World of Tanks player. And that is because it is the hull of a tier 10 Swedish heavy tank, the Kranvang, with the turret of a tier 9 British medium tank, the Centurion 7-1. So just how does the combination of those two vehicles in this Franken tank compare to some of the more competitive heavy tanks at tier 9? I'm going to compare the STRV K to the AE Phase 1 and the Concept 1B. So immediately we notice the STRV K has a 105mm caliber gun that deals 390 damage per shot. I guess that is getting its British lineage. However, its rate of fire is really disappointing. This vehicle has a sub 1,950 damage per minute. When I say sub, I mean sub 2,000. I don't really feel that the DPM of the A Phase 1 or the Concept 1B is special, but the STRV K is a whole 10% below that. Now, the alpha damage of 390, not too different to 400, but when you consider that not only do those two vehicles hit harder, they also fire 10% faster, yeah, I think you're seeing why the STRV K is very lackluster within that regard. So it will have to perform a lot like a Centurion 7-1, where it isn't too aggressive, never gets caught in all-in situations, and just has slow, easy fights on a ridgeline. The penetration of this vehicle is 252 on its standard rounds, and it doesn't have heat or Hesh on its premium rounds. It has 310mm of APCR rounds, and if you were hoping that this vehicle would get special high explosive rounds like the Centurion 7-1, that is not the case. All in all, I'll say the ammunition selection on this tank is quite disappointing compared to a Concept 1B, for example, where you get high explosive anti-tank on your premium rounds and incredibly good shell velocity on your APCR standard rounds. And the AE Phase 1, for example, gets 340mm of high explosive anti-tank rounds on its premium rounds, meaning that so far the STRV K is really lackluster with regards to the vehicle's firepower. But maybe the gun handling is where it's going to make up for it, and it's not really the case. This vehicle has 2.5 seconds aim time, not great and much worse than the Concept 1B. Its accuracy, however, is really good for a heavy. 0.34 will allow you to snipe at a decent distance or to aim for the weak points of your enemy tanks. However, be warned that this tank has really bad dispersion values of 0.19 when moving and turning the tank, and also 0.15 when turning the turret. That means that you almost certainly have to use vertical stabilizers in this tank, otherwise your bloom is going to be horrific and you're not going to be able to snapshot like the A Phase 1 and the Concept 1B can. So that kind of negates the advantage of the accuracy unless you have a real long time to be able to aim at your opponents. Fortunately, the STRV K has 10 degrees of gun depression, although really on a tier 9 heavy, it's not that special, especially when you think that it's tier 9 Swedish heavy tank counterpart, the Mil 2 inside the tech tree, is packing 12 degrees of gun depression. All right, so, well, maybe because it has a medium turret, it's going to have medium mobility as well. Well, that's not the case either. The STRV K is limited to 40 kilometers an hour forwards. However, Tanks GG, when taking into account the vehicle has worse ground resistances than Wargaming actually suggests they are, never really gets up to its top speed limit even along the hard terrain. Limited at 36.8 on hard, down to 20.8 on soft. This means that while the STRV K does have a better top speed limit than the A Phase 1, when it's practically never actually faster, and on medium and soft it is actually slower than the AE Phase 1 because of the horrible ground resistances the vehicle gets. And let's not even begin to compare this tank to the Concept 1B, as that vehicle is practically running rings around the STRV K. This was undoubtedly one of the most disappointing things about this tank, was the lackluster mobility that stopped me from being able to get to the ridgelines to truly dominate them like you can in a Centurion 7-1, or you definitely can in a Kranvang. All right, well, maybe this thing's going to have great hull armor and turret armor. Well, as you all know, that's really not the case, because the armor layout is identical to just slapping a Centurion 7-1 turret on a Kranvang. The hull armor, it will work if you are using your gun depression. As you can see here, if you're using your 10 degrees of gun depression, the upper hull will be a nice ricochet, but your lower plate will be horrific. But if you're on even playing field with the enemy team, the whole of your hull armor will get penetrated even by tier 8s. The turret armor, on the other hand, looks like it's pretty thick at the front, thicker than the Concept 1B with 254 and 90 millimeters of side armor. Yeah, but then you realize it's just a Centurion 7-1's turret. If you shoot to the left and to the right of the gun, there's a mantlet with no protection, so you've only got 240 millimeters of armor there. Apart from that, the turret, it's fairly solid. It does have a weak point on top. The real problem with the Centurion 7-1 turret is when you're not using your gun depression, your opponents are above you, the whole of the top turret becomes easily penetratable by everything. And if the enemies fire high explosive anti-tank, they will go through the forehead of this vehicle every single time because it only has a 70-degree angle. And unless you are using your gun depression, this turret armor is pretty darn tragic, especially for a heavy tank. It's decent for a medium, but considering that the STRV K doesn't get the mobility of the Centurion 7-1, it just feels like it should have had better turret armor to be able to make up for that fact. On the other hand, the vehicle does have good hit points at 1,850. It's got 400 meters view range as well, which will allow you to be able to spot your opponents at decent distances and less chance to be set on fire than the American tanks. So now onto the crew, and this is where it was incredibly annoying for me inside the STRV K. And that is because before its introduction, there were only 4 Swedish heavy tanks in the game. You had the Kranvang, the Emil 2, and you had the Emil 1951, which is a premium at tier 8. The STRV K, on the other hand, has the same crew loadout as if it was the Sabaton tank, because they want to have, or a Centurion, I guess, because they want to have all of the crew. One thing that I would question is if you've got the hull of a Kranvang, but the Centurion turret, I guess all of the crew are going to be sitting there, right? Because the Kranvang only has 3 crew members, and this is the big problem. When you get the STRV K, you will get the Brothers-in-Arms crew in it, which is nice, but unfortunately, you're going to have to train up the entirety of a radio operator and a loader to go along with your Kranvang crew. And so that's going to be a little bit irritating at first, as you won't have all of the extra things. It annoyed me so much, and I know that I'm going to be playing this vehicle a lot over the next few weeks, that I took my crew from my STRV 74 and put them in this tank to be able to make up for the slots that are missing. It's just really irritating when Wargaming put premium tanks that are just have different crew to the tech tree vehicles, because usually that's where your best crew are going to be, and one of the whole reasons about having a premium tank is that you're training up your crew for your tech tree tanks. Now, while you will be able to train your Kranvang crew up, it's just going to be irritating to have the extra 2 crew members just sitting there in the vehicle doing nothing, pretty much, especially considering that they're brothers-in-arms as well. I'd love to use them in a different tank. So how would I like to set this thing up? Well, I'm going to go for vents, a gun rammer, and vertical stabilizers on this tank, because it's got 400 meters base view range, which means that it's going to be able to get up to a healthy spotting distance with the right crew skills. It definitely needs a gun rammer because the vehicle's rate of fire is so awful, and vertical stabilizers to try and make the gun handling work so you can actually engage people on the ridge lines. I guess you might drop out one of those modules to try and use a turbo to try and make this thing faster, but it's still slow anyway. Yeah, I just feel that this thing has no possible good options because you're trying to make up for how lackluster most of the aspects of the tank are. Anyway, let's go check it out in some gameplay. So I believe that When you have this tank and you load into the battle, it actually plays a song by Sabaton. However, I will get copyright striked, and I don't want that, so unfortunately I'm not going to be able to play that. But look at the center of your screen right now. As you're loading in, the aether from the heavens descends down and enters your vehicle. And so you can go at your opponents with improved vigor. No, look, all jokes aside, this tank does actually look really cool. And despite how lackluster pretty much everything else is about the tank, I think Wargaming have done a cracking job with making this vehicle look beautiful. In fact, I'd say it's probably one of the best looking tanks in the game. But unless you are a Sabaton fan or you just like it when your vehicles look good, when it comes down to it, it's about the gameplay, right? It's about how efficient the vehicle can be. And a lot of you out there will not be Sabaton fans. You won't care about how your tank looks, and what you really want to know is, will it make you tons of credits? Will it make you lots of bonds? Will it make both of those at the same time? Will it be good for crew training? Or is it just a fun tank that is going to be able to be enjoyable to play while doing all of those things, right? So now what I want to do is show you the ultimate scenario for the STRV K. And of course, what is the ultimate scenario for a tank with a Centurion 5.1 turret and a fairly okay gun? Well, a fairly slow-paced stroll through the enemy team on a ridgeline. That is pretty much the ideal scenario, and I can think of no better situations than playing on Westfield for a slow stroll through the enemy team. Now you're seeing here that when we're actually using our gun depression, our turret armor is actually working out very well here. Whether this is because the enemy don't really know where to fire at this tank, or... No, I think that eventually there's nothing that really people are going to be able to do. Maybe I guess they could shoot in the mantlet, which seems like a bit of an alien concept. But when you are using your 10 degrees of gun depression, which I'm practically using the entire time, then the weak point up on top of the tank is no longer really a big issue, and your hull armor is decent as well. Now, while you're not really going to fight on a ridgeline with a Super Conqueror very easily in this scenario, unless of course he turns his turret for me, and then I get to take advantage of that, which will be lovely, you're still very decent on a ridgeline. The real problem with this tank is that the mobility is so tragic. One of the reasons why the Centurion 7.1 does so well, and also why the 5.1 does well, is because the vehicle has a fairly good grunt in the engine. It can get up to 50, and then it's kind of a more heavily armored medium tank when it manages to get into that position. The problem with the STRV K is that it doesn't have that grunt in the engine. It's actually incredibly slow. Even for a heavy tank, I'd say it's slow, especially now that there are vehicles like the Concept 1B. I wouldn't say AE Phase 1 because that's not the fastest of heavy tanks, but even the Emil 2 feels like it's a pretty quick tank when it manages to get up to speed. The STRV K just never really does that. And while you can slowly grind people out on a ridgeline, when you actually manage to get there, you're very efficient. The problem is getting there. It's such a slow vehicle that quite often I found myself just behind where I needed to be. Also notice there that this vehicle on the move has incredibly poor accuracy because of the terrible dispersion values of the tank, so watch out for that. So we're going to try and fire a standard round there against the weak point of the Type 5 Heavy, but yeah, screw me for trying to actually not load gold in this tank. Obviously, as the vehicle does make premium credits, which is the whole purpose of playing the vehicle, it's going to be nice to be able to spam gold in this vehicle and still feel that you break even, or at least even make profit by the end of the game. And so I expect that this tank will be a favorite for quite a lot of liberal applications of gold at tier 9. You know those kind of players, the ones that just only seem to fire the gold or fire premium. I think that this tank will be good for them. But still, at least Wargaming has only given it 310mm a pen. Imagine if they'd given it 340 like you would have on the A Phase 1. Then this thing would have been an incredibly annoying thing to fight against. Although, when I think about it, does it even really make that much difference? I swear that people just spam gold anyway, irrelevant of how many credits they make at tier 9 or tier 10. But I guess then they've got to jump down at tier 8 and kind of get their economy back going to be able to afford to go up to tier 9 and tier 10 to be able to spam the gold and do it all over again, right? Yeah, that's where this vehicle is going to be a little interesting. And I think why it's always a dangerous slope. Because obviously, this one will be going into the game undoubtedly in a poor position. The statistics of this tank are bad. They're just bad for most tier 9 tanks. I would also argue that this vehicle, apart from it looking cool, is fairly unimaginative. Let's take a Centurion 7-1 turret and put it on a Kranvang hull. And when you don't use the fancy style on this tank, the vehicle literally looks like it's just that. Now, I understand that there's some historical relevancy about the Swedes importing British tanks, and they wanted to do a test as to whether they could use a Swedish hull to be able to cut down on the costs, or maybe it was just a better hull, and then use just the British turret, because that was something they were incapable of using at that point. Irrelevant of there being any kind of historical reference there, Wargaming have broken the historical significance to their game so many times that it almost feels like a complete joke that they would try and do anything but that now. Especially for the first tier 9 premium tank, which is oh so special. Or is it? I'm going to be honest here. For my play that I've had in this tank, I have not enjoyed it at all. The vehicle's been too slow, and once I actually get into position, unless the fighting is very long-winded as it was in this game, the vehicle didn't have the damage per minute to be exciting. It didn't have an auto loader, or an auto reloader, like most of the heavy tanks that have gone into the game have had recently. Now, I'm not suggesting that every new tank that goes into the game needs to be fast and have an auto loader, but I also think that it's ignorant to not suggest or recognize that those are the vehicles that new tanks are competing with. And so when Wargaming puts in a new tier 9, and it frankly just feels a little lackluster, and it doesn't feel special, and it's just arguably an okay bit of an okay medium tank combined with probably the worst bit of a Swedish heavy tank at tier 10, dropping it down to tier 9 and basically taking away both aspects of what makes the tank fun. The Centurion 7-1 is fun because the vehicle can get to a ridgeline quickly and be a heavy medium tank. The Kranvang is fun because it has a great turret. This tank has neither of those. Now I want to show you an example of that. And we're going to see a fight here that started off really well on Mountain Pass, but in one of the quickest fashions just went absolutely unbelievably horrific very quickly. So I'm fighting against a T-55A, an Object 432, and a 53 TP. The T-55A is clearly being far too aggressive, and I back off and try and get my friends to be able to shoot the T-55A. But in this scenario, I know that I need to try and get some shots off before all of his friends manage to come into play. And oh, there is the real Swedish tier 9 heavy tank, the Emil 2. Let's see how well we do against that in a second. So we're bullying this T-55A. We're going to try and aim for the weak point of the Emil 2. And we miss it, but we can see that the 53 TP just shot me instantly in the weak point of my tank. I'm going to go around the corner again. And what the... So that's 2 heat rounds entering the vehicle, and the 53 TP hit me again. All right. Well, yeah, I've just got to play, right? I've got to try and... Oh. Yeah. That was painful. So using battle hits, we can see just how unfit for purpose the STRV K's turret armor was for that situation. The 53 TP hitting the weak point on the top, not 1 time, not 2 times, but pretty much 3 times in a row. Now, you could argue that they got lucky enough that they should have probably invested that in a lottery ticket because maybe it would have meant a little bit more. But if I won the lottery for every time somebody has managed to do that to me when I've got a weak point on top of my tank, I'll probably have a yacht, a private jet, yeah, the list goes on. Now, what's really important here is seeing just how the Centurion 7-1 turret on the STRV K holds up to heat rounds from the Emil 2. We can see that it just goes right through because this angled surface is not enough if you're not using your gun depression and the round from the 432 as well. That was one of the most brutal losses of all of my hit points in quick succession that I've had in any high tier vehicle that I've played recently, and it was happening so consistently to me in this tank. It's almost as if the Centurion 7-1 turret, it's okay for a medium, but if you don't have that kind of medium mobility to be able to go with it, it really feels a little lackluster. Now I want to show another example of where the STRV K just never really felt as if it was a fun tier 9 to play. When I think about tier 9 tanks, I think about either incredible armor, good mobility, flashy damage per minute, some kind of new mechanic to be able to enjoy. Tier 9 tanks are usually kind of beta versions or test versions of the Tier 10, which has an awesome opportunity for you to be able to experience something new. So I decided, yeah, maybe I can try and take the fight here. We had an EBR at the beginning of the game spot everybody over towards the east. And so I was feeling kind of confident going against this Centurion 7-1. I want to show the Centurion 7-1 what the Centurion 7-1 turret feels like when it's Swedish with a shield and a sword on the back, right? And a big Sabaton logo, because that's definitely going to make me more dangerous in the world of tanks, I guess. So the TNH 105 1000 is making his way over towards me. Luckily, I know my turret armor is good, but unfortunately, my rear armor is not good against the LT-432. The T-44 actually fires a high explosive round, and everyone's diving in on me. Now, I guess you could argue that I put myself into a vulnerable situation. We're quite lucky they actually managed to shut down the Centurion 7-1 there with a very fortunate fire. But you notice how just bad this tank's damage per minute is. I'm really struggling to be able to handle the situation, and thank goodness the T-110E4 comes in. Now, most Tier 9 tanks, I feel, are better at brawling or more durable. I didn't bounce a single hit point of damage because the hull of this tank is probably one of the worst hulls on a Tier 9 heavy tank. And unless you're on a ridgeline, you're using that gun depression, then the turret armor and the hull is absolutely horrific on this vehicle. But unlike an Emil 2, or unlike a Kranvan, where you're then going to have raw DPM and an autoloader to be able to fight your way out of the situation, you just don't have that with this thing. You're there stuck playing as a sub-par Centurion 7-1, and you just never really feel fit for purpose at doing anything apart from grinding on a ridgeline. So are the credits rewarding enough to justify playing a rather boring and lackluster Tier 9 premium tank? Well, for the round that we saw on Westfield Encounter, where we managed to get 4,396 damage, this was my ace tanker for the 1,421 base experience that we received in the 2,000 spotting as well. We actually received 88,000 credits, but that is wrong because that is on what replays, and we're going to have to go over here instead. Luckily, I took a screenshot of the garage, and we can see I received 132,000 credits, of which I spent 18,000 on repairing my tank, 43,000 on resupplying those gold rounds and the regular rounds that we fired, and we make 69,000 credits profit. Now, that is not bad at all for a Tier 9 tank, especially considering that we also made bonds for apparently playing a Tier 10 vehicle. Well, I guess a Tier 10 vehicle or a Tier 9 premium tank. But considering this was definitely one of the better games I had in the vehicle, and I didn't exactly slam only gold in this game, yeah, I'd be looking at that as a disappointing reward for a Tier 8 tank. And I honestly think that with the cheaper standard ammunition costs of your Tier 8s compared to the 1,015 credit cost per shell on the STRV K, you're probably going to make better credits playing Tier 8 premiums than you will do playing Tier 9. However, that's kind of beside the point, because this is, as it stands, the only Tier 9 premium that you can play to be able to make good credits and also to make bonds at the same time. So it's definitely a novel opportunity to be able to make credits and bonds and enjoy Tier 9 gameplay, which is, I'd say, for me, much more fun than playing Tier 8. But for all the reasons that I detailed in my video from a couple of days ago, I really wish that we hadn't seen Tier 9 premium tanks going into the game. All that it's going to do is increase the disparity between players who can afford to pay to be able to get this tank and the other players who can't. The bottom line is, the STRV K, at least for me, is a very boring and lackluster entry into World of Tanks at a time where it just feels like for the last few years, Wargaming have been putting in a novel tank with a novel feature that either one-upped something or was more and more exciting. I feel that this is on purpose by Wargaming, and it's not because they suddenly want to start to add boring, balanced vehicles to World of Tanks. This is because they realize this is the first of very, 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 very many Tier 9 premiums that will be released over the subsequent years. And they're releasing this one with, I'd say, below average statistics, because they know that if they start from the bottom, that they'll slowly be able to power creep up and up and up with the premium tanks until they're at a stage where they are definitely as good, if not better, than tier 9 tech tree tanks and tier 9 reward vehicles as well. Wargaming will also be putting this one into the game because they realize that if they put it in at the bottom, not only will they benefit from future power creep with everybody having to buy multiple tier 9 vehicles as they slowly become redundant over the years, but also the player base is likely to have less of an outrage at the idea of there being tier 9 premium tanks in the game if they're not jumping in and absolutely slamming games and dominating in ways that other vehicles couldn't. I am genuinely confused by this vehicle. I want to jump in and say that it's really lazy, just taking a Centurion 7-1 turret and slamming it on a Kranvang hull and putting it at tier 9. If this was at tier 8, and it was obviously balanced around about tier 8, I would thoroughly recommend that you do not get this, and it's an awful tank. And I almost certainly know that in the future there will be better tier 9 premium tanks than this. However, there are some aspects that obviously I like about the vehicle. The fact that it has that cute little intro where you have the light beams descending from the heavens, or Valhalla, whatever you want to be calling it. I like the design of the vehicle. I think it looks really cool when you kind of just blur your eyes and forget that it's a Kranvang and a Centurion 7-1. And definitely what they've done on the back of the tank is pretty snazzy as well. And the fact that you get a Brothers in Arms crew with the vehicle that has unique voice acting, and that it plays a special Sabaton song as you're going into the battle. Yeah, I think it's a pretty cool tank, but it doesn't shy away from all of the awful things that we've discussed, and also that this is opening the tap on a whole new way to push the economy of World of Tanks firmly into the hands of those that can afford and will purchase tier 9 premium tanks. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, that's it for today. I really hope you enjoyed this tank review. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If it was useful also. But if you hated it, give it a thumbs down. And let me know in the comments what you think about the STRV K. Do you think this thing looks like a bit of a stinker, or do you think that there's enough about the vehicle that might try and sway your coin purses? And are you going to try and do the mission marathon that starts today as well? I'm going to be streaming my heart out over the next 10 days on my free-to-play account to try and get this thing for free, although I'll never have the joys of having this special style because I'm not going to spend the gold on it on my free-to-play account. And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.